What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be looking at one of the two trickster builds which I'm currently playing with. I would say that this build that we're going to look at today is pretty much done and dusted. I don't really think I'll change anything on it, and it basically makes you a SpaceNinja. It is an anomaly based build, and we'll just go through it from end to end as we usually do with these build guides. So we'll look at the gear, the weapons, the skills, the skill tree. Something which was popular in a previous video as well was just discussing the sort of like the rotation of skills, how you use them, what buffs that rotation brings to you, and just sort of like the mindset around making all of that work. Now, first and foremost, I'll say that this build is exceptionally good in just isolating a target and just bursting it down completely. So very good for killing bosses extremely fast, elites, captains, whatever. I think that this kind of happens to be the trickster's speciality, is this kind of like hit and run tactic, like getting in, dealing a lot of damage, and then kind of like, you know, either teleporting away or just basically getting away before you die. And that's definitely something that this build does exceptionally well. Now, as with any build that works this way in nuking something, is that you do suffer a little bit with, you know, your ability to do AoE, and more specifically with your ability to chase off or chase down enemies that are trying to avoid you. So this is something which this build is not exceptionally good at, but because you deal such a huge amount of damage, and because we do have access to some AoE tools in our weapons, it's not that big a deal, because the time that you waste in chasing down, you know, these little runawayers is made up for just how brutally you nuke down bosses, or captains or elites, which I'm sure you've seen in the footage in the background. But that's basically the introduction right there. Let's go right ahead and jump into the build. Right off the bat here, as I said, it's an anomaly build, so you'll see that my anomaly is sitting at about 152. We'll go through weapons like we usually do when we start. This is the standard anomaly setup, I would say, which is of course a death shield with fortress and whatever else you want on there, whether you want to start with the moaning winds or something like that. I'm a huge Shadow Comet fan, so it's got Shadow Comet on there. Then you've got Anemoy with moaning winds and radiation splash. Both of these just basically meant to deal as much damage as possible on a rotation of reload, with the added benefit of radiation splash giving some, you know, vulnerable to whichever enemy you're hitting with it, which further on increases the damage down the line. Lastly, also moaning winds and clip combustion on my pistol for another rotation of that same thing. So again, I do believe I addressed this in a previous clip, but let me just say that although this seems to be the very hated moaning winds combo, the point is that this build specifically suffers a little bit with being able to deal with a lot of enemies that are around you, and if you're trying to take out clusters of enemies. Temporal blade works exceptionally well, but it basically works like a cone in front of you, and so you will often find yourself wasting rotations of temporal blade if you're trying to isolate enemies and, you know, sort of kill them. The moaning winds combo, you know, basically deals with that situation because it does an AoE around you. So this is exceptionally good at basically just hitting stuff and running past them and triggering a moaning winds to take care of stuff behind you. And that's really the reason for its inclusion in the build, if you're asking me. When we look at the skills right now, and when we look at how it all comes together, the point is that this build dumps so much damage on whatever's standing in front of you that hardly anything lives through for you the need to apply moaning winds to it. But I would say that moaning winds, this combo, and unless you can find something else, I mean, you could use sandstorm from air to the desert, for instance, anything like that, but you do need something that is able to just basically deal a little bit of AoE damage around you so that you can deal with stragglers. But nonetheless, let's move on to the armor. This is using the 3-piece bonus of Edge of Time, and I have the headpiece, the pants, and the boots. The reason for that is that what you're trying to do with this build is you're trying to stack, first of all, of course, anomaly power, because it's an anomaly power build, but secondly, you want cooldown reduction. 99% of your damage and your tools are coming from the 3 skills that you have, so you want to drive their cooldowns as far down as you can. And you'll see that with this setup and with the proper, you know, choice of nodes in the class tree, you're able to get down to almost a 6-second cooldown on all 3 skills that you use, which is really kind of like where you want to be. So with that in mind, the 3-piece that I'm suggesting here all have cooldown reduction on them. If you had have taken, for instance, the chest piece or the gloves, then you wouldn't have had cooldown reduction, but you could have, for instance, had additional anomaly power. But the cooldown reduction in the grand scheme of things means more for this build than the 14,000 anomaly power that you would have gotten, especially if you consider the scaling, which we're also going to talk about just now. But in any case, starting off with the goggles, the headpiece, just firstly, also, of course, the Edge of Time set bonus gives you 100% additional damage to Temporal Blade, which is a big part of this build here, and 100% to Cyclone Slice, which I don't use in this build, but you could potentially incorporate that in here, except instead of the second skill, which I'm going to suggest that you use. And it's possible that it's going to work really well. The thing is just that me personally, I don't like Cyclone Slice. It's a skill that I don't really like. I don't like the look of it. It just doesn't do anything aesthetically for me, and that's why. I could be wrong, and it could be like the bomb, but yeah, this is the way I choose to play the character. Double slice on here, damage enemies are additionally cut with, so this is just stacking additional damage onto your Temporal Blade. As I've said, Temporal Blade is essentially the linchpin of this build, and this is where the majority of your damage is going to come from. Backstabber gives you additional damage when you jump in behind something with Hunter Prey. Hunter Prey in this particular build is used to set up your combo a lot of the time, so you're using Hunter Prey usually on the toughest enemy in a cluster or in a group, or the boss or the elite or the captain or something like that. When we go over to the chest, we've got Cut Loose here, which reduces the cooldown of your Temporal Blade, which is very important. 20% is a huge reduction, so that's pretty good to pick up. On here I have the tier 3 mod Unstoppable Force, which increases your anomaly power by 50% for the resistance piercing. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this later on in the video, but this build features exceptionally high resistance piercing, which is really good as well against bosses or enemies with a lot of life basically. And secondly, this build utilizes that resistance piercing and to further on increase your anomaly power with that, like through this skill, but also through other nodes that are going to come with. So you're going to see more about what I mean with that when we get a little bit deeper into the build. When we go over to the pants, we've got Captain Hunter on here, just further accentuating that damage to the elites. And we've got Strong Slice, which again just ups the base damage value of Temporal Blade. So once again, really good to pick up. Next, we've got Slasher. It's super important that you have access to 2 Temporal Blades at this build, and that's because the nodes in the tree for this build work in a way where one of the effects of the node comes into effect after your Temporal Blade ends. The effect ends. So having 2 of that means that your second Temporal Blade can actually benefit from this after effect of the first Temporal Blade, which is super important because that's really where you're going to see your second Temporal Blade is always going to hit like a fucking Mack truck with this build. So yeah, super important. Power assimilation, again, in my testing with power assimilation, it's super weird, especially on certain expeditions where certain enemy types, which generally are not considered to be elite, still actually give you an increase here. So it's quite often that you'll see that even though there's, let's say for example, 1 or 2 elites on the field, you are actually getting the effect of 3 to 4 to 5 elites being on the field. There's different expeditions where you notice this. Scorch Lands is one of them, Frontline is one of them. So while it's not exactly clear, and in my sort of theory is that certain enemies that are considered to be high level enemies or level 48 enemies or anything like that, whatever you want to call them, actually still trigger this effect as well, even though they're not generally considered to be an elite. But nonetheless, this usually gives you quite a fat amount of AP, and this build deals with a lot of things which increase your AP by a percentage base. So the more you can attach to the base value of the AP means that that percentile is just going to keep increasing it even more. The last piece, we've got Temporal Armor on here. Now you'll notice so far we haven't talked about any defensive mods, and so this is the only defensive mod on this build. It's a very effective one though. It boosts your armor by 50% for each affected enemy of Temporal Blade. It stacks up to 8 times and it lasts 8 seconds. Now if you jump in and you hit 4 or 5 enemies, you are virtually unkillable from an armor perspective. Yes, anomaly damage is still a little bit of a problem, but you see the other thing as well is that of course the way how the trickster works is if you kill stuff in close range to you, you actually get shield, And so you always have this kind of like a double. You've got your health and you've got shield, which helps with dealing with damage. So this might look, with the initial setup and the way that I've explained it here now, that this is not this is kind of like a very soft character, but once you start playing it, you'll realize that this particular trickster is kind of tanky and pretty hard to kill, especially once you're in the thick of things. You've got your rotation going and you've got all your skills impacting on that. You are actually quite chunky. Lastly, I've got no resistance against the fortified, which increases your resistance piercing by 50% of your armor piercing. Now, again, when we talk about resistance piercing and so on just now in the rotation part of this discussion, this will make a little bit more sense to you. But lastly, like I said, your main things that you're trying to stack here is anomaly power and cooldown reduction. Those are your priorities. After that, skills life leech is okay, status power is okay. Any one of those two. Skills life leech might be the better one out of the bunch, but that also just depends on your playstyle and how tanky you find yourself to be or how much damage you're taking. That's it. Okay, so if we go over to the skills, by now I think it's clear, especially with the sort of like comments that I've been making, that this build uses temporal blade, of course. So you've got two of them. It uses Venator's knife to set up higher damage combos essentially, and also this, you know, gives the build some versatility in terms of slowing minions and things that you're basically dealing with on the screen. And then lastly, you're using Hunter Prey to close the gap on enemies and basically, you know, to deal with stragglers and enemies that are far away or on different levels than you. It's also a kind of an oh shit button, because the minute you jump in behind something, you do get some shield as well. So in a moment when you are super low, you're on red life, something's gone bad or something like that, you can jump out of this to a far away enemy, you can get some shield, kill that enemy, get more shield, and then come back into the fight again. And the reason why this all works so really well is you'll notice that the cooldowns here, you've got 6.9 seconds on Temporal Blade, you've got 6.3 seconds on Venator's Knife, and you've got 6.9 seconds on Hunter Prey. This essentially means then that your rotations are brutally fast. You also have to be concentrating the whole time as your skills come off cooldown, so that you can capitalize on them and don't lose on potential DPS that comes from, you know, something being on cooldown and then lying unused for like 2 or 3 seconds, which is definitely a change of pace from playing other character types where your cooldowns are generally a little bit longer. So that's something that you need to get used to while playing this. But more than that, it kind of means that this character, every 7 seconds, every 7.5 seconds, you basically can burst down a boss or a couple of really big enemies, or just a whole cluster of stuff that's like standing next to each other. When we go over to the class tree, what we'll do here, and we're about to get to the part where we talk a little bit about the resistance piercing, but let's just go through some of the key nodes here, and then you'll understand more when we actually look at the rotation part of it. So again, we're doing bottom tree because you're trying to pick up as much anomaly power as possible. There's also some static resistance piercing nodes in this bottom part here, which you also want to be grabbing, like over there. The first major sort of important one to pick up is anomaly scything, which basically says that you get 30% additional anomaly power for 5 seconds after activating your melee, which again makes it kind of important to work melee into your rotation in some way. Whether you're, you know, sort of priming it from a AoE melee jump like into a bunch of enemies, or whether you're just doing your skills in rotation and then popping a melee somewhere in between there. But 30% is no slouch, and it's for 5 seconds, so it essentially covers your next ability that comes after that. Along the way, you also, as I said, you're picking up AP, you're picking up cooldown reduction. The next important one to pick up is counter shield. Now counter shield basically says as soon as you throw your Venator's Knife, then your anomaly power is also increased by 50% for 10 seconds. Good stuff. Then the next important one to pick up is Combat Shield's Timeline. This says when you activate your movement skills, so this is when you Hunter Prey, you get another 50% additional. So just by going Venators and then Hunter Prey, you're getting 100% additional anomaly power. Now, when we get to the back end here, you have Anomalic Acceleration, which says when your damage skill ends, increases your anomaly power by 50%. So this is another 50% one. And specifically the damage skill that ends here that we are using is Temporal Blade. And that's why I said 2 Temporal Blades are important, because this kicks in after the first Temporal Blade's effect ends. So then if you cast another Temporal Blade, then that one's going to fully benefit from this effect. Last 2 that we can sort of talk about, or 3 rather, is Leap of Clincher. A really fucking weird name, But this is activating your movement skills increases your resistance piercing by 25%. So here comes the resistance piercing. So this means when you hunt the prey, you get that additional resistance piercing. Then Scion of the Void, this is a big one. After the end of any damage skill, so it's again like the previous one we talked about, when your first temporal blade ends, you get additional armor piercing of 30% and you get additional resistance piercing of 25%. Now, all of these things stack together because you'll see that their cooldowns are fairly long. They're 10 seconds. So within one rotation of all of your skills, as you move through the rotation, you can pick up a lot of these effects and have them essentially be present on your third and your fifth, a thing that you do within your rotation. More specifically, the last thing in your rotation, for instance, is a temporal blade. That will just dump a lot of damage because you'll have a huge amount of AP at that point. Lastly, you also do have Altered Executioner, which is phenomenal because this says for every enemy that's in close range, your anomaly power is further on increased by 10%. This is also huge because, again, if you jump into like a group of 10, 12, 13 enemies, then you are getting a huge boost to your anomaly power. At this point, let's turn to this little sort of box of data that I built here, and let's talk about the rotation. Now, what you want to be doing is the rotation that is the most efficient with just putting a lot of damage down on someone is Venator's Knife, which you open up with, then you hunt the prey onto the biggest enemy, you temporal blade them once, you melee either them or whatever's in the area, anything like that, so you get the melee bonus, and then you use your second temporal blade. Now, during this rotation, it's entirely possible that you're going to be hovering at around 450, 460,000 anomaly power, but just by doing a little bit of looking on the internet and stuff, you can see guys that have found ways of course stacking this far higher, trying to get to 1 million and that sort of thing. And I would say that by no means is this the most efficient way to build this or the best way to build this. I definitely think that there's weird stuff that you can throw into this build using this as sort of like the baseline and just tweaking a little bit that can probably net you even higher damage numbers. But this happens to be the most consistent way to play the character for me, and also the way that I would say was relatively the easiest for me to build, due to the fact that essentially most of your tier 3 mods come from the pieces which you're getting from Edge of Time already, and then basically the others are just filler in mods to strengthen those skills. And then you've got the two resistance based mods, which is Unstoppable Force and no resistance against the Fortified. So back to the table. So the point is, once you hit the Venator's Knife, counter shield pops, you get the 50% additional AP. Once you hunt the prey, you get the combat shield that gives you the additional, plus you get the leap of the clincher, which now starts giving you resistance piercing. Your first temporal blade hits Anomic Acceleration and Scion of the Void, as explained there, which gives you those additional facts, so even more AP on there and more resistance piercing. And then your melee gives you Anomaly Scything, which gives you another 30% AP on top of that. So by the time you get to your second temporal blade, you're benefiting from all of those effects, and that's the one that really hits like super hard. And quite honest, a lot of the time stuff is dead by here and you don't really, whatever you started on is already dead, so there's no time for you to hit it with a second temporal blade. But this stuff decimates brood mothers and basically end of expedition bosses like it's nobody's business. Now, just lastly, those two lines there, you can see that essentially what I'm trying to say is that the 10% increase to AP, this is at the start there, because this is just based on your character already. Because you have 20% resistance piercing when you start out, and you're getting that just from the class tree. And as you start hitting your skills, this starts ramping up, so you go to 45% resistance piercing, which translates to a 22.5% boost to your AP. And then by the time you get to the back end of the rotation, you've got 70% resistance piercing and 30% armor piercing, which through those two mods folds back into resistance piercing again and gives you a whopping 42.5% addition to your anomaly power. And this is where a lot of the real brute force of this build comes from. So that's it for the build. I've got a little bit of footage running in the background here, but give this a try, especially if you like just being like basically, like I said, a space ninja and jumping in and assassinating stuff from behind. This is a phenomenal build to play in a co-op scenario as well, where you have other characters that are kind of like doing more like the AoE representation in the squad, and you can really just be like this assassin, mercenary that just jumps and basically kills all the big targets and assists with the trash or the stuff that's kind of like standing on a cliff that you need to knock down. That's basically it. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Go ahead and tell me in the comments down below if you're gonna try and build this build, if you have a better version of this build, if you're currently playing this build, what do you think about it? How is it treating you? How does it compare against some of the other characters that you've played? And consider liking and subscribing to the channel if this is the sort of thing that you enjoy. This is the kind of content that I bring to the channel, not just for this game, but many other games as well. I also want to draw your attention to the fact that I stream during the week, usually Monday nights and Thursday nights. Those are the definites, and then sometimes I like to sprinkle in an extra night or two, like for instance this week when I'm doing Monday night, Tuesday night, and Thursday night, and that's always at 8 o'clock CEST. And I'd love for you guys to join and hang out and, you know, check out what I'm playing and what I'm doing and all of that. Also, usually we do have one carry event in the week where I play with viewers and kind of help them through harder content, but in the game, in Outriders. These days that tends to be more just, you know, playing together with the viewers, because people have really come up in this game, and I think everybody's starting to get to the point where they're able to do the hard content, but once in a while we still find someone that needs help, and it's always great to sort of give that back to the community, which is why I do it. Also, lastly, there's of course a Discord, and it's linked in the description of this video down below, which you can join. This game as well as other games are featured there, with rooms where you can play with other people that are also part of the Discord group, and it's just a small community that we're trying to build around the channel, and we'd love to have you. Other than that, I don't really have anything else more except the most important thing, and that is that you should have a fantastic morning, a great afternoon, and a super cool evening no matter where you are. And until next video, fucking cheers.